on the nature and production of capital, a moral and political theory of capitalism, by Travis Bardsley. Part 1. Introduction. Chapter 1. Principles. What does it mean to be a capitalist? What does it mean to act capitalistically? What are the goals of a capitalist? What are the goals of a capitalistic society? Are these goals better or worse than others? Capitalism currently lacks a well-promulgated and objective moral theory, a theory of how we should act. Capitalism is a system that can be objectively defined, but very few agree on what the overall goal of capitalism is. Many believe capitalism is a means to an end, and not an end in itself. As such, it is argued that it is moral or immoral to the extent it achieves or fails some other moral theory, like utilitarianism, egalitarianism, hedonism, materialism, libertarianism, or the like. However, I'm not here to argue a morality of capitalism based on how it achieves one of these pre-existing moral theories, which we all disagree upon anyway. I propose here a moral theory of capitalism in and of itself, that there is an element to capitalism that provides such a moral goal, this goal being the production of capital. I put forward in this treatise a moral theory of capitalism based on the production of capital. This moral theory defines and extrapolates the principles of what capital is and can be, and I argue how such a view of capital can justify its production morally. This moral theory derives a corresponding political theory that extends such principles to society and government. The principles of this moral theory will no doubt come as controversial to many, as they have to myself, but I believe they are true and just. Many of these principles I had once rejected, but now upon reflection, I have come to believe. Given what I argue in this treatise, I hope upon your own reflection, you may also come to at least consider and perhaps believe in such moral principles if they are indeed true. I put forward here a theory of capitalism, not the theory of capitalism. By no means do I speak for the principles of all capitalists, only the principles that I have personally derived from aspects of capitalism. No theory is perfect, and I do not claim that the theory I propose here is. Assess the validity of these principles based on my arguments and your own reflection. Given the flaws of this theory, I believe this theory is better than most commonly promulgated theories of morality and politics in guiding our lives and political systems. The principles of this moral and political theory I outline here in Chapter 1, to be argued in the rest of the treatise. Profit, making money, is probably the most understood goal that best explains capitalism. But few understand why profit is good, because they don't understand what profit is. How does one make money? Since most of us can't print money, we can only get money through force or through exchange. So on the whole of society, as long as money isn't printed, money is never made. It would appear that money gained by one person would subsequently result in the equivalent loss by another. This is true. So is capitalism a zero-sum game where others benefit only at the expense of others? No. These confusions stem from the lack of understanding the concept of capital. It is principally capital and not money that determines profit. In general, a capitalist would rather have more capital than more money. Capital encompasses all forms of property, not just money. Capital is measured as the market price of property, commonly called wealth. I will argue that the creation of capital, the creation of wealth and property, is the best moral objective for individuals, organizations, and society. I will argue that we, as individuals and as society, can create capital based on how we organize the material world resources, and property we control. I will argue that capital is something that we have the power to create or destroy based on our understanding or ignorance of nature. Our understanding of nature allows us to organize property into productive and functional arrangements, creating capital. Since we have the power to create or destroy capital, it lies within the moral realm and not just the scientific and rational realm of observation and deduction. I will argue that in this ever increasingly secular society, the production of capital is a good moral code that can guide our lives and choices, that it can guide us in terms of our career paths, our investments, our education, our consumption, our research, our charity, and yes, even our family. I will argue that our political systems are morally at odds with capitalism because they are based on egalitarian principles, notably that of modern suffrage, where every adult human being should have one and only one vote. The creation of capital and egalitarianism are in many ways mutually exclusive, that they are not compatible. The negative outcomes to capital from our political systems stem from their egalitarian basis. Because these moral theories lead to different outcomes, we as a society must choose between either moral theory to direct our political systems. I will argue that the production of capital is a better moral theory than egalitarianism, where either equality or inequality is justified when capital is produced. I will argue that human beings can be viewed as another form of capital, like the rest of property, but self-owned. I propose that the capital of human beings derives from their received investment from conception to adulthood, and then by their productivity, their ability to produce capital. I will argue that capital should be the ultimate political unit, that suffrage, taxation, and political benefit should be in proportion to the ownership of capital. The concept of human beings as a form of capital is what can better justify having political rights in proportion to the ownership of capital, since, for many individuals, much of a person's wealth lies within their own body and not just the other material property they own. I will argue that our rights and sovereignty as human beings do not originate from our race, genetics, place of birth, age, gender, education, culture, intelligence, consciousness, sentience, or emotional capacity, but instead from our productivity. We earn our rights and sovereignty. Productivity is what morally distinguishes us from objects, animals, and other human beings. The creation of capital is how we can objectively quantify our productivity. I will argue that it is these productive individuals who should be the ultimate sovereigns of society, not governments, states, or nations. Instead, it is governments that should be subservient to these ultimate sovereigns. It is these sovereigns who, through taxation, are the creators, sponsors, and providers of government and the rule of law. From the principle of property rights, which grant us authority over the property we create, pay, or provide for, these sovereign taxpayers are justified in their authority over government through suffrage in proportion to the taxes they pay. I will argue that it is the production of capital that serves as the moral basis of our rights, principally property rights. That we are granted rights because in such granting, we collectively create the most capital for society. The establishment of rights are contingent to the production of capital. I will argue that rights granted to productive human beings is the best structure of society for the production of capital. With capital being a quantification of all the material property we care for, including human life, I hope to convince you that the moral goal of the production of capital for both the individual and for society is most desirable. These are the principles of a moral theory I hope to convince you to consider.